Ladies and gentlemen, it's actually a very great pleasure for me to speak to you today. This very impressive gathering of the German industry really represents a major contribution to the economic success, not only of your country, but of Europe as a whole. And today's discussion will be focusing on how Europe can maintain and even develop its strategic sovereignty in the shifting winds of global economics. I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to express my views on it, because I believe this is really an existential issue. And there are at least two essential reasons to develop the EU strategic sovereignty. An offensive one, because we must acknowledge that we are a top player on the planet. And if you do not believe that one, or if you shy away from that, a defensive reason, because the past decade has shown us concentrated dependencies can lead to economic disasters that have been affecting and could affect all of us again quickly if we do not react more strongly and faster. So on the offensive side, what I'd like to start, and taking lessons from our US friend, is to actually promote a bit the EU. The EU is one of the largest economies in the world, with a GDP per capita of 25,000 euros and 440 million customers. That's more than the US. It is the world's largest trading area. It ranks first in both inbound and outbound investment. The EU has the means to secure its prosperity while being faithful to its values, democracy, and openness through economics. That's for the offensive side. But on the defensive side, COVID, the Russian war, or even the financial crisis, all of those have shown that we must manage much better our interdependencies, whether they are energy, commodities, or sophisticated input. And because that may sound a bit theoretical, let me give you or share with you a concrete example. China, and I believe you've been talking about it, at least in town. China is heavily endowed with critical commodities. It supplies 2/3 of the world's critical raw materials. It hosts most of the global cobalt refining capacity. China is most likely the only country with control over almost the entire supply chain of electric vehicle batteries. And if that's not enough, today, 7 out of 10 electric vehicles sold globally are manufactured by a Chinese firm. From 2016 to 2022, Chinese FDI in the EV value chain surged more than 40-fold from $605 million in 2016 to over $24 billion in 2022. And meanwhile, Europe's share of global investment in lithium-ion batteries has dropped to, you know how much? 2% in 2022. So we must react, and we can do it. It would be foolish to believe that rising geopolitical tensions and all the major challenges to the post-war rules-based global order we are seeing today will not last. They will. And because they will, they command the EU to react to this. So the question is not whether, it's how. Obviously, and I know you won't expect that from a French minister, obviously not through protectionism. Europe's history Europe's history is based on a positive approach to trade and codependencies. A significant share of the EU prosperity comes from trade, both within the EU, with the single market, and outside the EU, with a common trade policy. But to this effect, we have been leveraging on a predictable and constantly developing international economic rules-based order. But the world has changed, and we need to adapt. The EU can and it must strengthen the alignment of its economic, trade, and foreign policies. And that's called economic security, and it's essential for our prosperity. So where does that lead us? I have two messages for you. The first one is how to further strengthen our industrial base, because today is the industrial day. And the second is how to leverage on our strength to protect a global level playing field, as well as our interests, exactly like other powers are doing. So let me start with the first one. I think we can only be as strong as our industrial base is. And this starts with a very ambitious European industrial policy. And there are currently two challenges on which we can improve. The first one is bureaucracy, and the second one is energy. On bureaucracy, thank you. I mean, really, we need to cut that. We do want to speed up all administrative procedures. We will be happy with the Net Zero Industrial Act when we can call it the Complexity Reduction Act. And for example, we must reduce IPCEI appraisal time to 4 months. That should be our ambition, not 1 year or 2 years. And the reason we French want to set up a sovereignty fund is not to get more debt, it is to simplify and speed up access to European funds to support better investment in strategic sectors. On energy, our objective is very simple, and I'm sure you talked about it just before. Our industries need reliable supply of low-carbon energy at competitive prices. And that's the main gap we have with the US. In practice, that means increasing the share of local energy production, such as renewable, and the use of all decarbonized production sources, respecting national energy mix. And in particular, this means completing the reform of the electricity market design by the end of 2023. I mean, truly, I believe that affordable low-carbon energy is the basis of Europe's competitiveness, and it's the most urgent. Now, for industry to thrive, obviously, it needs to have access not only to affordable input, but also to significant markets. And this is why we are pro-trade. We must have an ambitious trade agenda. Ambitious doesn't mean naive, it means being strategic and requiring reciprocity. We support, for example, the forthcoming agreement with New Zealand. It is balanced, it is sustainable, it is strategic. We support an agreement with Chile. It's also very strategic. And when we talk about reciprocity, we also mean public procurement. Our public markets cannot continue to be accessible to third countries if those third countries do not open their own market to EU companies. We want a reform of the EU's public procurement directive to ensure better reciprocity. And if that does not happen, then the EU will have to show firmness and restrict access to European public procurement markets to companies from those third countries that remain close to us. And obviously, we need to integrate the challenges of securing input into trade and diplomatic relations. So that was my first message. The second one is to leverage on our strengths to preserve the level playing field and protect our interests, not our market. Oh, anyway. We have tools, we do. We need to use them to defend the level playing field. Those tools are trade defense instruments, and they're available to ensure that our industrial policy efforts are fruitful. So I'm thinking in particular of strategic sectors such as electric vehicles. The regulation on foreign subsidies is now coming into force. It should enable us to fight back on distortive subsidies with all the firepower of our economic power. And this is simply about restoring fair competition for you and for us. Beyond that, we must also protect our data, our critical infrastructure, and our technologies. And for this, we need to close the loopholes in the foreign direct investment screening system. This is a prerequisite to protect our data, to protect our infrastructure and our technologies. And for this, we support the compulsory adoption in each member state of a screening mechanism for a well-defined perimeter of strategic infrastructures and technologies. As an example, only certain 5G providers should be allowed in our systems. Last, and I'll come to the conclusion, we have to act on digital technology and especially cybersecurity and the cloud. We have to strengthen European cybersecurity levels by implementing all the legislation adopted in this field. No more legislation, but implementing the one that do exist already is enough. And that would include reporting incidents and vulnerabilities due to severe security flaws that would impact the production of industrial chains to the relevant national authorities. We are also in favor of putting in place a protective framework for the most sensitive European personal and non-personal data. Basically, we cannot allow not European authorities to access our data without authorization. And this is what the cybersecurity certification schemes for cloud services is about. If I'm very blunt, the cybersecurity certification scheme, that's really about addressing the issue of some extraterritorial regulation. And now I'm coming to the end. So these are the messages that I believe we need to focus if we want to strengthen European strategic sovereignty. It's energy reliable at low prices. It's about cutting on bureaucracy. It's about protecting our market and fighting to get market abroad. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.